Welcome back to the last day. We made it, Suzanne, to the final day.
I know it's hard to believe that we're here already.
So what do you think? Do you have some reflections from yesterday while everyone piles in?
Yeah, I finally got a chance to get in some of the networking sessions, and people seem kind of jazzed, which is really nice. They've said it's been very helpful to certainly hear what works, but more importantly, to hear what doesn't work and what not to do. So that was really nice to hear.
And I think it was nice to have people, the people are out there actively looking for ways to address this issue. We heard from the first couple of days the size of the issue, but people are actively working on this. And it was really interesting. Sometimes actually simple, elegant, simple solutions can go a long way. They can really move the needle in the short term, which I think is important to building up momentum for these more longer term actions.
Yeah, and I also got a lot of conversation yesterday about people saying, oh, it's nice to know there are things they can do that will make actionable difference. I mean, I think that particularly when you're dealing with the issue of bias was probably the most revelatory, was that, hey, there are things we can do that aren't huge lifts that really can make a big difference. So that was really nice to hear. Paula's talk was outstanding.
Yeah, you get that kind of feeling that the problem is so daunting. Where do you start, right? And I think everyone was able to get some ideas, which is great.
Awesome. Okay.
Should we get going? What do you say?
Yeah, so I'll turn it over to you.
All right, great. So it's great for me to be able to introduce my friend and colleague that I've been working with for the last several years at Berkeley, Professor Lee Fleming, who was the founding director for the Fung Institute for Engineering Leadership. Lee, it's great to have you here this morning.
It's great to be here. Thank you so much, Bo. The very first thing I want to do, besides joining Bo and Suzanne and welcoming all of you, is to thank Suzanne and Bo for their phenomenal work in this conference. It's really been impressive. Suzanne in particular has worked incredibly hard to bring this all together. And without her vision, her leadership, and her very heavy lifting, this never would have happened. So thank you, Suzanne. Thank you, Bo. I'd like to highlight two themes that I think have come out of this conference as an educator, and they map very closely to our goals in this initiative. The first thing is that our first goal and theme I'd like to talk about is we're working here in academia at Berkeley in this initiative to provide you with a more diverse workforce. This workforce will transform the future. They'll understand technology, they'll understand intellectual property and strategy, but they'll also understand the ethics and leadership of how to make it happen. They'll be able to take technology to create wealth and welfare and to make the world a better place. So how are we going to do that? First, we work incredibly hard the minute the applications come across our doorstep. We admit diversity, we seek diversity, we reach out into the K through 12 schools as well. We bring those students in, we challenge them with real innovations of how to bring real innovations into society and to use those innovations to create a better world. We practice what we preach. It's a very, very collaborative challenge. Gender, ethnicity, orientation, even profession now. We now have law and business students, policy students in our classrooms working on these same teams. This has begun in engineering, but it's much bigger than engineering. And the whole university, as you saw from Carol Christ, is getting behind this effort now. The second theme I'd like to talk about is that after we've given you a more diverse workforce to hire, we want to support you. We want to support you in making these students successful and making your firms and your organizations successful. As we've talked about in this conference, we've talked about metrics, best practices, things you can do now, ideas you can apply. We'd like to continue that and expand on that as well. I'd like to leave you with two thoughts. First of all, and I realize I'm preaching to the converted here, our goals of inclusion and diversity and innovation, it's first order importance for our society. Absolutely crucial that this happens, and I won't go into all those details. Second thing I'd like to leave you with is that this is actually very, very difficult. I know there's been a feeling of many false starts in this over the last few decades in America, but I think it's really tough, and I think we should admit that. If you know your British history, William the Conqueror, in 1066, Battle of Hastings, afterwards he wrote a doomsday book, and he wrote down every family surname and the wealth of that family throughout all of Britain. Scholars recently have taken those data and they've looked at those surnames, and they've found that even after 1,000 years and 50 generations, that the inequality of profession, of wealth, it still persists. And so this is a very, very difficult challenge. But to paraphrase John F. Kennedy, it just because it's hard doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. And I think the most hopeful and one of the most wonderful things to come out of the last few days is that there are things we can do. We can do them now, and we can get started in changing the world. So this work is incredibly important. Thank you so much for joining us, and stay with us. Work with us to make the world a better place. Back to you, Suzanne and Bo.
All right. Well, thanks, Lee. That's really inspiring. And that's, I don't think I can say it any better after that, right? So again, just building on all this, today is really where we're going to get down and hear from both of our partners, the founding companies, pledge companies, and also partners in the ecosystem about what else needs to be done. Before I announce the pledge, I just want to take a few minutes and thank a few people, because it, of course, takes a village to do this. First and foremost, I want to thank McDermott, Will, and Emery for providing all of the technical support that you're seeing. In fact, Lauren Vollmer, who's been running this whole thing. Lauren, can you come on camera for a second? And yeah, there you go, wave. Lauren's been awesome, and we have had no meltdowns, knock on wood. It's largely because of Lauren and her guidance, so really, really appreciate that. And 2 months ago, when we had no pledge members and things were going wrong, we decided to bring in a project manager, and that was Hannes Vosberg-Malm. Hannes, wave a little bit. He has really helped bring everything together, and we just appreciate everything and that you do and all the help that you've brought us here. So again, kudos to you. Of course, it takes more than just Lauren, Hannes, me, and Bo and Alan. So I want to say Jeremiah Chan, Charu Karani, Asan Sheikh, David Andrews, Carol Bolitz, Jason Friday, John Mulgrew. All of us have been meeting multiple times a week for the last 6 months to try and put in place all the things that you're hearing and seeing today over the last 4 days. So thank you all. And to all the companies who spent all their time and energy working on things and trying to figure out what's happened. And in particular to the Gathering, the best practices group that I lead, because 3 years ago, I walked into a meeting and said, hey guys, I want us to start working on this. And instead of telling me I'm crazy, they said, great, let's go fix it. And so again, all the companies who've been working on this really appreciate it. But we're here to talk about the pledge. So let me tell you a little bit more about what that is. So okay. So we started out with a framework. We're now in day 4 of this conference, and today is really about just talking about how to be a good ally and how to advocate for change. You'll hear some more about that a little bit later. The diversity pledge, you've seen lots of references to it. You've seen a lot of the companies sharing what they're doing. Again, I'll just go through it again. We're asking for companies to make a commitment to change, and we're asking that you tell us what your underrepresented inventor group that you want to be focusing on. It could be one, it could be multiple. We just need to know what they are. And we want to know what pledge practices you start and if you complete any in a calendar year. And those are that we'll be asking that for both year 1 and year 2. In year 3, we want you to give us some metrics data that allows us to determine the rate of change for your URI group, underrepresented inventor group, from year 1 to year 3. We're going to collect that through a third-party intermediary, so it will be anonymized. We won't know what data is for Facebook or what data is from Lenovo or anything. We won't be able to tell that. We'll only be able to tell that we got data from, X number of companies, and here's what it looks like. And so that way we can begin to chart out and show people what change looks like. And why year 3? Year 3, because we can't tell with any real certainty things that happen in any given year very quickly. It takes a while for this change to wind its way through the system. So that's what we're asking from you. We found 30 companies who were willing to seed this movement. These companies all agreed not only to commit to the pledge, but to commit to all the other companies coming after them, to be open, to be sharing, to let them know what works and what doesn't, and to really help try and bootstrap everyone to get through this process faster. So I really want to say, a big thank you to these 30 companies for actually providing leadership and guidance and being willing to help. It was a big ask and they answered fantastic. You're going to hear from them shortly, some of those folks in the next upcoming session. But what was interesting is when we were out talking to companies looking for founding members, we also started having a number of entities that didn't necessarily have inventorship programs wanting to know how they could help. So we created a new segment called Pledge Supporters. And this was really going to be around law firms or consulting firms or academic institutions or data analytics providers, where they also are part of this ecosystem and want to work with their clients and help their clients also get in on this process. And so we want to say thank you to all of them. And we hope to go from these ones on the page to many, many, many more. I think there's a lot of opportunity here for companies in this group to provide thought leadership and to help provide guidance and education to many of their clients to help bring them in the fold. So what can you do? I mean, this conference is really great and it's really fun and we're all jazzed. And what we don't want you to do is to walk away and do nothing. So we're asking you to join the pledge. You can either join as a member, as a company with an inventorship program, or as a supporter. Either way, we want you to help us reach what we're trying to do. We want you to be transparent. I mean, one of the themes that has been constant as people have been talking to me throughout the last 4 days is the level of honesty, the level of real transparent conversation about this, how hard it is, most importantly, what hasn't worked, that you don't have to be perfect. All of those things are super helpful. And I think we have to be honest and be clear that this is not going to be a straight line effort. And it's going to take some time. And everything we will do will not work. I mean, I think one of the things that's really interesting for someone who spent their entire career creating best practices, the way that that normally happens is you watch what companies do, you figure out the decision processes, you see the results, and then you genericize it and you send it out into the world. That's how all the Edison in the Boardroom books were written. And we knew everything there was to know about what was likely to happen before those things were done. That's not the case with this movement. We are the equivalent of open sourcing this at this moment, right? We have a lot of really good ideas on what the pledge practices are, but there are many things that we can still learn from companies. And we are hoping that the more companies we bring into this arena, the faster we can learn and the faster we can share information. So what's the goal, right? What's the ask here? Well, the ask is we're seeding this movement with 30 companies. We want to go to 100 companies by the fall. We need your help. We can't do that by ourselves. Companies, talk to your friends, talk to folks that you know, ask them to join this group. Pledge supporters, talk to your clients, educate people where they need it. We also want to go, once we hit our 100 company goal, we want to get to 200 companies and so on and so forth. Again, the more people focusing on this problem, the faster we can all get there. We also really want to work with pledge supporters to help provide thought leadership, research and data, messaging, anything we can do to help kickstart that for you guys. We want to do that. And more importantly, we want to break this cone of silence. Companies need to start talking about this issue, particularly around innovation, that it's hard and we're working on it and we're going to solve it. And most importantly, we want to really continue to provide actionable practices that result in meaningful change. You've heard a number of people talking over the course of the last 3 or 4 days that are providing things that can be done today that will increase your results and get more diverse inventors into the innovation system. That's great. And we want many, many more of those. So I encourage you all, join the movement. Go to increasingdii.org, read the FAQ page, talk to the companies on this list. Anything you can do, just come do it with us. Bo, back to you.
All right. Thanks, Suzanne. That was great. So thanks for giving more information to everyone about the diversity pledge and how more companies can join and how people can support this activity, support the pledge. And of course, I'm looking forward to our continued partnership on this important initiative.
Absolutely.
So thanks so much for setting that out for everyone. I think it's pretty clear now. Now we just need to do the hard work.
It always comes down to the hard work, doesn't it?
Right. It's
All
like, it feels like we've done it a lot, but we've just started, right? So, but I think I get the feeling that when we have so many people doing it together, it feels like we can accomplish this.
We just need it at scale now, guys. All right, I'll get off.
No worries. So yeah, more information on the diversity pledge can be found on increasingdii.org. Now I'd like to open up the next session for discussion with some of the current diversity pledgees. It's my pleasure to introduce the moderator for this session, Caren Ulrich Stacy. Among her many accomplishments, Caren is the founder and CEO of Diversity Lab. Caren created Diversity Lab to focus exclusively on boosting diversity and inclusion in the legal profession. The lab experiments with unique and innovative ways to recruit, advance, and retain diverse talent through the use of data, behavioral science, technology, and design thinking. I can't think of a better person to lead this next discussion. Caren, over to you to introduce your panelists.
Thanks so much, Bo. I'm glad to be here today. I'm a huge fan of this effort because for those of you that I work with at Diversity Lab, you know that our foundation is based in experiments. And as Suzanne and Lee and you have said, Bo, you know, it's about the successes as much as it's about the failures. And so the companies that were early adopters of the pledges are great to start talking to some of the other companies about what they've done so far, including what's worked and not worked. And that's who's joining me today. So I'll have the panelists turn their cameras on and I'll introduce very briefly. I think you already all know these people, but just in case, we're joined by Alan Lowe. Hi, Alan. Alan's the VP and Deputy GC at Facebook. We're also joined by Isabella Few, who is the Associate GC at Microsoft. Joining us now is Julie Setzer. Julie is the SVP of Research and Development at P&G Ventures. Also on camera now are Laura Quatela, near and dear to my heart, who also serves on the board of Diversity Lab's Move the Needle Fund. Hi, Laura. Laura is the, well, she does so many things at Lenovo, but her title on any given day is Senior Vice President and Chief Legal Officer. Also joining us today, hi Scott, is Scott Frank, who's the President and CEO of Intellectual Property at AT&T. So thank you all so much, because as Suzanne and Bo and Lee mentioned, you took on a huge feat of strength by being first. As you know, in law, we typically have a lot of fast followers, but sometimes we have trouble getting those early adopters. But you and your companies have shown that you're willing to make, as Lee said, the world a better place through this effort. So let's get started. I'm a data geek, so I'm going to ask you a question and ask that you answer with some of the more measurable objective values that your company and you have experienced as a result of the diversity pledge. So let's start there. And Isabella, could I hand it to you? In terms of Microsoft, you know, you're well into this process. So what have you seen happen as a result so far?
Well, you know, even though we've been measuring this stuff for a while, I do think that there has been just an amazing increase in enthusiasm and energy around a lot of the things that we're trying. And so while, you know, we're all going to be reporting our results later, I do think that what we've already seen is just a huge amount more engagement and uptick in terms of people wanting to learn, people supporting activities. obviously the biggest value in measuring anything is just having the data and being able to track progress. But what I have been really surprised by is how much people want to see the data and how much it has really sparked a lot of conversation.
Yeah, and you putting yourself out there, and the other pledges by being transparent with data is a huge, huge step forward. Laura, what would you say? How has Lenovo benefited thus far from the participation?
So Caren, I'm going to set a little context. Where Lenovo is a bit unique in being a China heritage company with headquarters in both Hong Kong and the US. So diversity has been our secret sauce for years, not only with respect to a very multicultural workforce, which is enabled by a diversity office, but also in the products that we develop to serve a diverse consumer base. Our vision of delivering smarter technology for all is a nod to the imperative of accessibility for all. And so it's a natural and welcome fit for us to focus on inventor diversity. As in all companies, our patent process bridges our diverse and innovative employees with the innovative products that they create. I serve on Lenovo's global D&I board. It includes senior level executives across the company with a mission to ensure that D&I is modeled through inclusive leadership, and it's a priority in strategy and business decisions. This oversight has enabled us to meet the D&I commitments we make publicly to global female executive representation and US minority representation. And this September, we'll announce new and expanded commitments on these and additional D&I metrics. In addition, I mentioned product diversity. So similar to the model that Professor Fleming described, we've established a product diversity office that is responsible for implementing what we call diversity by design. It's a process that ensures diverse teams are involved in both the product planning and execution phases, and that our products are inclusive of and accessible to all consumers. So specifically with respect to the patenting activities at Lenovo and this initiative, I'm really proud of the progress we've made on understanding inventor diversity. The data we've collected, which you are very focused on, rightly so, has helped us to see two areas where we want to focus our attention. The first is ensuring that we have broad participation in disclosing new inventions to protect. And the second is understanding trends and differences we see in prosecution. We have a long way to go, but with the full support of leadership we have, I'm convinced we can make big improvements. And to anyone who's listening who hasn't yet joined the pledge, so I'll do a little advertising for Suzanne. If you want to learn more about why this is important, take a few minutes to watch the video that was released earlier this week by the New York Times. It's called "She Changed Astronomy Forever. He Won the Nobel Prize for It." So give that a listen.
You know what? That's a great suggestion, Laura. And in a little while, I'll post it in the chat so everyone has access to it. I also want to remind folks that we welcome your questions, and we're happy to dig deeper in any of these topics. So please feel free to chat us up in the chat function. Scott, could I turn it over to you to answer the question for AT&T?
Sure. Yeah, we're committed to this cause in a big way, and we've actually been very committed for many years. We're going to share our data here soon, and you'll see that the numbers bear it out. At the same time, what's been interesting is it's one thing to be committed to a cause when it's kind of just like almost like your cause. It's kind of the right thing to do in AT&T, and we believe in it. But I think it's different when it's part of a bigger cause, part of a worldwide cause, and even being accountable to the world with your data, and by really putting this, I think, more front and center as a cause for society, and really making it even I think more significant inside AT&T. We've seen some real change, and I think there's a real energy inside our company. I think there's more people. It's amazing when you're in a big company like many of us are in. You think you're connecting with most of the right people, but there are so many people that we are finding we weren't connecting with that are now feeling like it's their time. And I can honestly say there are some amazing inventions that we're getting out of this, products and services that are going to come to the marketplace because of this cause. And I'm just happy that we're a part of it.
Kudos to you, Scott. Julie, may I turn it over to you to talk a little bit from P&G's perspective?
Sure. Yes. So if I think about the impact that this sort of focus on diversity and inventorship has had on Procter & Gamble, it's kind of maybe surprisingly obvious in retrospect, but what's really happened is we've started to see a much greater diversity of innovations. So if you think about our products, we are a consumer goods product company, and our historical focus has really been on having superiority on kind of functional benefits of our products. And as we've had more diverse inventors, one, for example, we've started to see more invention around really some of the holistic elements of the experience and not just the functional performance. And then the other element is we're seeing innovations that really impact some of the consumer groups that are big and important consumers of our products that, you know, had been largely ignored in the past. For example, some of the technology that's gone into our new Gold series, which is hair care for African American women, and some of the technology and innovation that's gone into a new brand that we're launching called Kindra, which is targeted menopausal women, right, who have a ton of big pain points that are not really addressed today in the consumer goods area. So, you know, this is very exciting. I mean, in terms of like actual business impact, we see real growth potential for our company as a result of these efforts.
Well, and what you just said, I mean, just highlights so well how if inventorship represents society, society benefits greatly from so many different perspectives. I was thrilled to hear the differentiation in the different products and what's come out of that. All right, so Alan, good luck. You have to live up to what everyone else has said so far. Tell us a little bit about Facebook's outcomes.
Sure. Can I just say +1? Is that good enough, or do I need to say more than that?
Yeah, I'm going to ask you to go further.
Okay. Well, let me build a little bit on what Julie said, because I think context is important, and you know how we got to focusing on this is really, I think, coming from two places. One is kind of building on what Julie said. You know, for us, patents are a proxy for our product innovation, and we want to have products that users want to use and represent our user base. And so we need that diversity and in our innovation to deliver the best products. And so we want to make sure that our patents represent that as well. The other piece of it, though, is that about 4 years ago, we did a hard reset on our patent strategy. And we really thought about, like, you know, why are we building a portfolio? You know, what are we going to do with it? You know, what's the value of having the portfolio? And as we really kind of distilled and understood what our purpose was, it became more and more clear that we needed to have a diverse portfolio as well for our purposes. And so that led us to really more in earnest focusing on diversity in innovation, diversity in our inventorship. We've kind of looked across the pipeline from the top of funnel, which is awareness and engagement, the submissions, to filing decisions, to prosecution, issuance, and even abandonment. And as we looked at our data, one of the things that we have seen is that we've seen a drop off across every aspect of that pipeline. And so whether that's for, you know, across gender diversity, racial diversity, and it really caused us to ask ourselves why, what is happening here? Because it's not simply just top of funnel where it's low, but it actually extends across the pipeline. So because it's been such a daunting sort of task and problem as we've kind of scoped and looked at it, we've really focused really on the top of funnel, which is the engagement, awareness, and filing. We've done a bunch of things to try to increase submissions, to increase ideation. We've done various harvesting sessions, large sessions, small sessions, broad subject matter, narrow subject matter. We have failed many times and found that we've set up these meetings and no one shows up, or a lot of people show up and nothing comes out of it. We've invited senior leaders. We thought that would be an incentive, and it turns out people were intimidated and they didn't show up because they didn't want to, you know, come up with the dumb ideas in front of their senior leadership. So what we have found is that small groups with very targeted problems that we're posing to them has been sort of the most productive. And we just ran some sessions in the first half of this year. And we saw with one of our product areas, we run multiple of these sessions, we increased the number of submissions from call it, you know, 7% or so women inventors to over tripling that. And so the numbers have really, you know, increased significantly once we figured out what worked. But it really took us a lot of effort to find out what didn't work first.
which is fair, right? Fail fast and do it differently the next time. Well, Alan, that's perfect because that leads us into exactly the next question. You know, I'd like everybody to chime in on what's been most surprising, either about something you experienced or something you learned. And I think, you know, you gave the example, Alan, of the different types of focus groups and which ones worked and which ones didn't. And it's interesting, right, about bringing the leadership in and people feeling uncomfortable because they didn't want to look stupid in front of your leadership. So that sounds like that was a bit of a surprise. You learned from it and you iterated. Let me turn it to Laura. What was one of the most surprising things that you or others at Lenovo learned as a result?
A couple of surprises, Caren. One was how quickly we were able to spot the issues that we need to focus on by collecting and reviewing the data. You know, using Alan's funnel analogy, which parts of the funnel really required our immediate attention. And, you know, what we're all doing here is a bit uncharted territory, and we often struggle at first to understand anything when we're dealing with issues as complex and nuanced as this. But within a few months of data collection, we were able to learn a lot about how our inventors work together and spot areas where we think we can make improvements. And now in less than a year, we've gone from not having any frame of reference for this conversation to being able to visualize trends that are important. An example is we're recognizing that inventorship at Lenovo is a team and collaborative effort, as Lenovo's average inventorship per patent is 2 to 3 inventors. So for us, diversity and inclusion is more than just increasing the number of participants from underrepresented groups, but also creating diverse inventor teams. So it's the data and insights that the data have provided.
That's interesting. And thinking about it from a sole inventor to a team inventor is interesting because, right, there's some data that talks about how diverse individual inventors is versus teams. And I'm thrilled to hear you're focusing on both of those. Julie, let me kick it to you. What's been most surprising?
So similar story. I think it was really interesting and surprising is that with as much emphasis as we've had at P&G on diversity and inclusion at every level of the company, and certainly within the R&D organization, we have a very, we're blessed to have a really diverse workforce. What was very interesting is when we started looking specifically at inventorship, it was not as diverse. It didn't represent our workforce even. So, the insight there, kind of Laura's point about the data and the insights is, really just even looking into that kind of opened our eyes to the fact that not every innovator at Procter & Gamble feels that part of their job is to, create sustainable advantage and protect the intellectual property that they're creating, right? And so exactly to Laura's point on this idea of diverse teams and making sure that the diverse teams who contributed to the innovation were actually named on the patents, right? So I think like Laura, we see this, we're excited because we see this huge untapped potential that we just didn't even realize was there until we started looking at the data.
You had me at data. Scott, do you want to weigh in?
Sure. Yeah, it's I think there's been a lot of surprises, but I'll tell you one of the best has been the people. So AT&T has been committed to diversity and inclusion, like I think the rest of the companies here for a while. And we've had, again, our numbers are going to show you we've had good diversity inclusion in terms of our inventorship for a while. But the thing I didn't expect was the energy and the excitement around kind of the current diverse inventors. And so it was interesting. We actually had a session last year, and we asked a number of them to tell their stories. And it's interesting. Again, I think when you're an inventor, you're doing it because you love to invent. You're not necessarily doing it to publicize kind of your story and what got you there. It is amazing the stories of some of these people. And again, many of these people are come from tough places. Didn't expect to be where they are, didn't expect to have the opportunity. And to be able to invent, or be a part of a team that invented something significant, I think was very exciting to them. And for them to share their stories and us to video them to the rest of the corporation has brought so many other people out of the woodwork. Hey, that could be me. That is something I'd like to strive for. And so I think, it's the human element. These are really, truly people. It's not just the products and services that result from it, but you're really changing people's lives.
Agreed. And it's interesting because, I am, like I said, a data geek, and I saw Saru teasing me a little bit on the chat function, but it is the stories that move people, right? It's not necessarily the data. The data can help us uncover, like Laura said, where the challenges lie and where we're making progress, both of which are hugely and incredibly important. But it's those stories, because as you said, the amount of passion coming from these inventors, and then for someone else to hear that and realize, if they look up and see someone like them, it seems much more attainable than it does to look up and not see people who look like you. So Scott, I'm thrilled that that was one of the surprising lessons learned. Isabella, what about you for Microsoft?
So I agree with all these things that everyone else has said, particularly on the human element of it. I guess I'll elaborate on that a little bit further. One of the most surprising things to me was how, even though we've been presenting data and thinking about innovation and diversity and innovation for a very long time, when we started to use some different tools, like things like, and this is going to sound kind of silly, but we use these word clouds with inventors. We started doing more, human things. I was surprised at how much more energy we got with using some of that, a different depiction of the data than we had shown in the past. And so, just a plug for Microsoft Power BI. It was really surprising to us, like how much more engagement we got, even though we had done a lot of these things in the past in terms of engaging with particular groups or trying to, get focused on our patenting process and how we could improve it. We just got way more engagement when we approached it from the diversity angle with, again, sort of a more human element about specific people, as opposed to just, showing the numbers. So it's been really just encouraging and energizing for everybody to see that aspect of it, as opposed to just, again, we've focused for years on our pipeline and how we increase invention. But we've been able to, again, get more inventors commenting on what works and what doesn't work in the process.
That's great. And Alan, you had mentioned a couple of surprises. Any final surprises before we move on?
Yeah, and I love the comment about diverse teams. I think that's something that we are also focusing on. I think the larger the teams, the more diverse the teams, the better the quality of the inventions, the ideas, and then the stories point is great. The thing that I would say more at a meta level that has been, I think, at least for me, a surprise is just for as much time as we've been spending on this, at least at Facebook, really, focused in earnest, maybe, at least 3 years and pulling data, how little we understand about the problem itself. And, if we look at this larger, process as a system, we've got innovators, we've got developers, we build products, we have a whole patenting program, a patent system. What we know is that the results of it is leading to underrepresentation all across the pipeline. And as we've tried to sort of get underneath the data to understand, well, why is this? What is happening? We've had different hypotheses and we've tested them and we found that sometimes they were wrong. We've done other things and found out that oh, this is some new reason here that we didn't even think of. And so it's kind of been an onion that we've kind of been peeling back. And I don't know how big this onion is, but or how many layers it has, but I'm waiting to get to the center and we haven't quite got there yet. So we keep learning things. So we've done some design thinking sprints and exercises to try to understand. We had a hypothesis that maybe there was some discouragement, if women were submitting and then getting rejected in the first one, they gave up. Turned out that wasn't the reason. And after having run one of the sprints, we learned that it had more to do with time that people had to spend on the patenting process, and that women oftentimes were more involved with, family management and activities and didn't have that extra time that oftentimes men inventors had to be able to write up invention disclosures and participate. And so what that, has kind of caused us to think about is, how do we change the system to allot time for people to participate who don't otherwise have time or not in the same way as others? We've done surveys to try to understand, how people think and what affects them and how they're spending their time. what they're choosing to do and not to do. But I think the thing that we found has been most productive has been experimentation. So let's just try things and see what happens. And we've done a bunch of that, as I mentioned earlier. We've done, as Scott mentioned as well, some of the spotlights. And now what we're, I think, shifting now to a place where we're running maybe perhaps too many experiments to be able to really tie down which ones are working and which ones aren't. Because if you run 5 at the same time and you're like, oh, we're getting better results, you don't know which of the 5 was actually you want to attribute to the success. So we may not now need to move to more controlled experiments to see, if we do this here and do that there, which one actually moves the needle. So for me, it's just this discovery that boy, this is a harder problem, a harder nut to crack than we thought. And I think I think that's the power of the pledge, and actually in companies coming together, is that we can share what we've learned, we can share what works, we don't have to reinvent the wheel, and we can all benefit together.
Agreed. And the thing that makes me so excited about this, and it's somewhat similar to what we've done at Diversity Lab with the Mansfield rule, right? Considering at least 30% historically underrepresented lawyers for leadership roles in law firms, is every month we have a knowledge sharing call. And interestingly, when we first started the Mansfield rule, the knowledge sharing calls were all about people sharing successes, right? Everyone put their peacock feathers up and said how great they were. And it took until probably 2 or 3 months in for people to start sharing what didn't work. And that's the neat thing I think about all of you so far, is that already today, in just the 20 minutes we've been together, you've shared both things that are working and things that aren't working in ways that you're iterating. So thank you for that, because everyone that comes with you on this journey will then feel comfortable doing the same thing. So that's really great. There's a bit of a chat going on. Mike posted a really good question. Jeremiah asked him to clarify. So I'm going to ask the panelists to pay attention to the chat, and we're going to come back to those questions in a bit. But you all talked a little bit about the surprises, seeing that you're well into this, right? But let's back up just a bit, because there's a lot of companies, right? You have the 30 that have joined with you, but as Suzanne said, we're hopefully going to add another 70 here very soon. And then over the next year, a lot more. So think back to the beginning of this and talk a little bit about what you might do differently if you did it all over again, and what you saw maybe in hindsight that you learned that you would want to impart on those that are just joining and just starting their journey. So Scott, could I start with you on that?
Sure, Caren. It's been an interesting journey, to be honest with you. It's one thing to be committed to a cause. I think people will say what gets measured gets done. And again, I think a lot of people felt like they were doing good in this area, but they weren't measuring it. And to measure it, you have to have the data. And I'll tell you, one of the biggest lessons I've learned, and I have a feeling this is going to be the way in most corporations, is the data is not necessarily easily accessible. One, it's interesting, just all the different types of people inside a corporation. We're all made up of a lot of different things. And so what is any of us, right? And so classifying somebody, and they can be multiple things, right? So how do you actually classify someone is a first step. There's also a lot of laws out there. And so every corporation has lawyers. And so there's issues about privacy and data usage, and what are you going to do with this data? And so I will just simply say the data exercise was much more challenging than I had anticipated. I mean, I'm just like, we got the data. Where do we stand? And I'm just telling you, this took many months to get over a bunch of hurdles. And so the last thing I simply want to say is, don't give up. Don't let these hurdles stop you, because it's important. It's important. It's not only the right thing to do, it's because for society, it's to treat people right, but it's the right thing to do for society to have the best products and services, the best innovations available. And it's the right thing for your company. And so, I think the biggest lesson is that don't give up, keep working through the process. And I truly believe every corporation can share the data. And if anybody has any problems with your lawyers or anybody else, I'm happy to talk to them, because there are ways to think about this when initially conservative lawyers are going to tell you there's lots of problems that you make it hard to do.
Scott, one of my favorite things about lawyers is that they're issue spotters. And one of the things I hate most about lawyers is that they're issue spotters. So, one of the things too, and this goes back to Mansfield rule for us, because we did exactly what you're suggesting, which is we asked individuals to self-identify, because then, we have a clear indication of where they see themselves and then how we would quote unquote count them in the metrics that you're talking about. But we also got pushback on the data, whether it was legal to collect it, whether it was we were setting a quota, which we're not, right? Because it's consideration. And the neat thing was we had 44 law firms sign on. And so anyone after that, if you were 45, 46, or 160, I got to say, well, look, AT&T got past that, Facebook got past that, Lenovo got past that, P&G got past that, and Microsoft got past that. Now, are your lawyers smarter than all of their lawyers? Ask yourself that question. So I think that was an excellent early lesson learned, because I think everybody here would agree with you. The data collection and the data piece of this is a challenge, always. Alan, what was one of the things that you would rethink or that you thought was one of the biggest challenges and ways to get over it, especially for those at the beginning of this process?
Yeah, let me just start by saying Scott's going to regret inviting people to call him, because I think he's going to get a lot of phone calls. The proverbial phone is going to call. Maybe it's his inbox will get filled up, but it was awfully kind of him to offer to talk to all the other lawyers in the companies to explain to them how to overcome these issues. I think gathering data certainly has been a challenge. The thing that I would say that we learned, I think, in this process that I wish we probably would have done earlier is that we kind of took it upon ourselves as the IP team and as the legal department to kind of drive this and to try to do this, on our own. But I think what we've learned is that there's a lot of natural allies within the company already. There's existing programs, there's skills and expertise, there's experience that if we just explain the problem, we can invite others to help us and be part of it. And I think that's part of what overcomes the data gathering problem, is that if you get HR on your side, if you get the product teams, the product development teams on your side, if you get the diversity team, if you get the data analytics people, and you say, hey, we've got this challenge, they're already trying to solve analogous issues and problems, complementary issues. They would be happy to participate in seeing this issue, and it's really up to us to really help them understand it and see it. One of the things that we've tapped into quite a bit more recently is our ERGs. So the employee resource group, the affinity groups, we have quite a few of them within the company, and really tapping into them as sources and as partners in trying to roll some of these programs out has been super helpful. So I think if we could have done it again, we would have started there, partnered with them, find out what their interests are, what are their goals, and try to align what they're already doing to what we're doing. Once we tapped into some of the behavioral scientists and data scientists that we already had within Facebook, they love this stuff. This is just more data for them to play with and more problems for them to solve. So it doesn't take much, but all you need to do is activate them, and in many companies, those resources are there.
Well said, Alan. Laura, want to add to that?
Sure. Well, just echoing Scott and Alan, I think, Caren, you of all people model the view that Scott mentioned, which is what doesn't get measured doesn't get done. So Professor Fleming gave us a call to action. It starts with collecting the data. And one thing I wonder about, an initiative perhaps that we can all take up, is to try to standardize the metrics a little bit. I mean, for instance, I know that some companies include in their innovation population IT professionals who are not inventing. That makes it hard to do an apples to apples compare. And so maybe we want to talk a little bit about, we probably won't ever influence the way that this is measured company-wide, but can we within the intellectual property groups at least standardize how we look at the data? And then I think, as Suzanne said at the outset, transparency is key. Even, this data can be hard to look at. It can be tough to talk about within a company because it's not always pretty, but publicly available information shows us that we're all in the same boat. So starting there, continuing to be transparent among our group is going to be really critical to success. And it allows us to row together to get to the goal of increasing diversity and inclusion in inventorship. Last thing I'll say is, I think we all have in front of us a laboratory of the pandemic. for many of our companies, including Lenovo, innovation has soared during this period of isolation, which is really intriguing, but it probably hasn't been the experience for all participants. So we have a new data set to look at and analyze and draw from to understand where this whole initiative should be going and who are the targets for priority attention.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. And I bet Isabella and Julie would second those things, but let's ask them specifically. Julie, you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I think my answer to your question in terms of what I would do differently really is to be bolder about really taking on the challenge. You know, I started a conversation, I think in about 2017, because IWPR, Institute for Women's Policy Research, wanted to talk to P&G because P&G was really leading the pack in terms of female inventors, and that continues to be true. And also, when we look at the percentage of our patents that have a female inventor, we can feel pretty good. But when you look at the percentage of inventors that are women and diverse, it's a different picture. So, you know, I think when I started this, you know, you are faced with this, well, should we be celebrating this or should we be fixing it? And, you know, the answer is really both. And I think kind of to the comments that you guys have made, when we got bolder about saying we want to take this on, there's huge upside potential, we got more partners involved, right? We got our legal partners involved. We got more of this ecosystem involved in really helping us. And as I said at the beginning, we're seeing the impact in terms of the types of innovations that are coming through the pipeline.
That makes perfect sense. Isabella?
So I agree with all these comments. I guess the thing that, to be blunt, that I wish we had done earlier, or maybe that I had done earlier, is not listen to a bunch of mansplaining, for lack of a better term. I mean, I hear everyone surprised. You know, when I first came to this problem, I thought, well, you know, the problem's time. I mean, I just know that as a person, right? And I let all these other men tell me that this wasn't the problem, that it was lack of confidence, you know, all these other things, right? And it wasn't until I think we got really engaged with the actual inventors themselves, the people that we were targeting, that we heard these explanations. And the other thing that I would say is there's not one problem, there's a bunch of problems, and they're different for everybody. So we have some research, you know, we have research groups that have less problem, right? Because they're under less product deadline. And then we have other groups that constantly under, you know, on product deadline, right? And so we have problems, you know, throughout those organizations, you know, with things like invention disclosure and that kind of thing. And so what you'll find when you talk to individuals who have been through the process a lot, you know, the people that you're actually targeting, as opposed to everybody else who just thinks they know what the problem is that you'll find it's, you know, there are some common themes about some of the problems, but, you know, we've tried to really tailor a lot of our processes to meet people where they are. And it's not to be condescending, but it is, you know, there are realities that are different about some of our different business units and the ways they invent and collaborate, right? And then there's different ways, you know, people want to manage their own time. There are, I mean, this seems really simple, but there's inventors who want to submit things one way, and there's other inventors who want to submit things another way. There's inventors who want to review things in one way, and then there's inventors who want to review things another way. And there are absolutely time issues with all this stuff, but I think it's just a microcosm for the patenting process. Is just a microcosm for everything else. And so you look at, you know, some of the broader studies. You know, there's just denial about some of these things. Like it seems obvious that, you know, it seems obvious to us now that, you know, time is an issue. There are other factors. There are other stressors that factor into that as well. So, for example, there was an article written by an economics professor. I think her name is Lisa Cook, and she looked at data around inventions by African Americans from there. I think there was a study done from 1870 to 1940, and what they found, which, you know, maybe isn't shocking, but for whatever reason was not believed for a long time, is that patenting by African Americans dipped during, you know, periods of, you know, unrest and violence against African Americans. So there was a big dip in 1900 when Plessy versus Ferguson came out. There's another dip in 1921 when the Tulsa massacre occurred. And so you think about all those things, and, you know, all the stressors, and as Laura said, the pandemic, you know, I think is one thing that I'm, you know, just very worried about. Like we saw differences in invention and innovation in our company as a result of the pandemic, both because of demands on our innovation in terms of the usage of our products, but also on people's time and stressors of all that stuff. And so I guess the thing I would say is that you constantly have to change. There's not one answer. There's not one fix. There's not one problem. And so when you think about peeling back the onion and all the layers, there are going to be multiple problems, and just really listen to the community that you're trying to reach rather than, coming up with all these theories that we as lawyers maybe like to come up with. But really, you got to meet the community where it is. So I wish we had done that earlier.
There was so much good and so many gold nuggets in what you just said, Isabella. I'm not even sure how to unpack it all, but one of the last points you made, I think we should highlight. And Alan said this too, and I think to some degree, everyone has said it in different ways. We can't just look at the quantitative data. We have to listen and look at the qualitative data that's coming from inventors, that's coming from HR, that's coming from the village, right? Both internally and externally in our companies. And I think, like Alan said, and you said so eloquently as well, Isabella, don't formulate what you think the problem is before you've asked. And ask that question in a lot of different ways from a lot of different people and really listened to the answer. So I am going to ask you all a question that I didn't tell you I was going to ask you in advance. So get ready. The pandemic has definitely, as Isabella said, and others, certainly weighed heavy on humans, on companies, on individuals, especially as we think about all the other things going on in the world at the same time, right? There's been huge racial unrest, and we've seen that in a lot of different communities over the last year, and certainly over the last, unfortunately, decades. But all of those things are happening at the same time. But you are embarking on a pledge to try to fix some of those issues, at least on the side of inventors. And then, as you said, your companies are looking at this in several different ways. How has the pandemic and these other things going on in our world affected you and this pledge? And I think that's important, because there might be some companies that say, gosh, we can't do this right now, right? There's a lot going on, but I'd argue that this is the exact right time to do this, even though it is, as Isabella said, time, right? That adds to what you do all day, every day. So let someone volunteer to answer that question, because there's a lot going on in our world. And if we want somebody to sign on to something like this, they may not if they feel like it's too much. Isabella, you came off mute, so I'm going to assume you want to answer that.
Yeah, I'll answer that. I actually think that it's the greatest time to do this now. I think the pandemic for us has really opened, it's actually been, I think, a very positive thing for the ways that we work. It's opened up the company to being much more empathetic to everybody as they are as an individual. I mean, from the very first thing, right, it affected different geographies differently. So I think that we had a newfound appreciation for a lot of that stuff. We also had a newfound appreciation for everybody, dealing with different issues. And so I think it was eye-opening to the company in terms of how we work. And also because, we have, we get information from our customers about, how they use, for example, Teams or all of our collaboration products. And so it's been a really rich time to think about things and get data. So we haven't had any resistance in terms of either transparency or, making commitments. I think for us, I think it's more about how do we coordinate all these efforts so that we're not duplicating effort, because there's a lot of attention paid to diversity and inclusion, right? And so how do we slot into some of those other issues? So it's less about should we do it? It's more about like, what is the most efficient way about doing it? And I do think, with respect to transparency, we didn't really have issues with respect to transparency within the company. I think there was bigger issues around what level of granularity, right, to push, because not because of the transparency issue, but really because of the constant reorg, right? How do you measure these things in different business units when they're reorging all the time, and inventors move all the time, right, to different business units. So I think there was a lot of discussion around that and how, what's the best way to measure. And then I do think that there's hesitancy about being public with it, not because necessarily of shaming or that kind of thing, but really because of privacy. I mean, so all of these, our lawyers aren't smarter than others, but you do have to recognize it's not just about, what we want to do. I mean, there are privacy concerns for the individuals. They vary by country. We have a global workforce. And so it was really more around, how are we going to manage all of that, as opposed to, us, being able to look at it internally and our business leaders buying into it. I think all of our business leaders buy into it. But the pandemic has been, I think, the best time to really look at some of these issues because everybody's looking at them fresh.
Yeah, and it's almost, what Laura said as well, which is it created innovation, right? Where people were isolated, they maybe were thinking more broadly and differently than they had previously. And Laura, you came off mute. Did you want to weigh in on this?
Well, I just want to join Isabella in saying that this is the time, this is the moment. We have this great opportunity of the pandemic, a positive side of the pandemic, to look at the trends and the impacts. One of my colleagues talks about the Linux software development project as being one of the most successful of all time, and it was done completely virtually, 100% virtually. And so he had involvement at that time and took that opportunity to analyze why. How did this great project come from people never meeting each other? What were the drivers? And we have that same opportunity here. Where were people more productive and more highly innovative? Where were they not, and why? What were the dynamics going on in those lives that prohibited or precluded them from being more creative than they otherwise would be? And then targeting, all of our companies are trying to figure out what return to work looks like. Well, we can actually help inform that model by bringing this information to management to say, look, these populations excelled and these populations really suffered. So how can we style and fashion a return to work model that suits both so that overall the company can be more successful?
Go ahead, Alan.
Yeah, Caren, I so agree with everything that Isabella and Laura said. To be more concrete, I think, the reason now is the time is because we're going through disruption and change. We're changing how we do work. We're changing how we collaborate, how we maintain cohesion, what the future of work looks like. And since we're going through change, we might as well make more change. If we wait, the risk is that we solidify into whatever the future looks like, and then we try to make change later after. It will be much harder to make change at that point. So I think now is the time. If I think about sort of the pandemic itself and what that's done, it's had pluses and minuses. In one sense, it's leveled the playing field so that people from remote places, people, who are not close to the center of power, they have the same access, they have the same ability to participate and contribute as everyone else. So that's been, I think, a plus. It's really leveled the playing field for a lot of people. But the flip side is what Laura was alluding to, is that I think it will have and has had disparate impact on different communities and different groups within companies. And we really need to understand what that is and how that is manifesting itself. And so, it is a great time to kind of look at this, and to what Isabella was saying at the outset. I think, it has created a level of empathy right now that people are open. And so I think this is a great time to be introducing change.
You're here. Scott, did you want to weigh in?
Yeah, just to, I agree with all the comments, to echo some of them, and just trying to reinforce, it is an interesting moment in time that we are in right now. Again, as Alan says, leveling the playing field. It's, when you talk about diversity, there are lots of people in a company that, kind of maybe get lost, don't feel connected. And it's amazing when you think back, a little over a year ago, we would not all be connected the way we are today. I mean, it's amazing how everybody has gotten used to this video conferencing technology, and we can all just hop on a Zoom and all feel like we're equal and together. And so I really think this, COVID has so many bad things, but one of the good things was really teaching us all how to use this technology, and all of us feel equal when we are together. And I also think, a lot of people during the pandemic have felt isolated and on an island, right? Part of it's the technology doesn't work for everybody the same. But I think for the most part, if you're working for a big corporation, you're figuring out a way to get the technology working, but you're still, I think a lot of people are working from home and feeling isolated. And again, talking about this being the moment, this being the time, we have an opportunity to bring everybody together and to rally around the cause. And again, this is another example with even this conference. I mean, if you think about this in the past, we would have tried to hold this conference in some city, in some state, and everybody trying to fly in, and lots of people wouldn't be able to make it. Who knows what it would have looked like. We wouldn't have been doing video conferencing. We were able to bring us together, all of us together, to really on an important topic. And it's really so easy to bring diverse perspectives together now and to make some great things happen.
Well said. And I just want to pull together a couple of comments that you all have made. And then Julie, I want to hear your wisdom on this as well. But Alan said, in different words, it takes a village, right, to do this, and involving all members of your company. And if your company is based in Palo Alto, this lets somebody who is not in Palo Alto still feel like they have the same say in what's going on, because, Alan's not in a meeting in person while everyone else is in video, right? And trying to get in, word in edgewise. And so it does, from that perspective, level the playing field. The other thing I would add is, involving other people in your company, this also provides a purpose that's bigger than them and the jobs that they've joined you to do, right? And for those of you, again, behavioral science, data geek, all of that, if you've ever read Daniel Pink's book, Drive, there are 3 things that keep people at your company, right? Autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And if at any given moment they don't feel purpose in their jobs, which happens sometimes, right? Signing on to something like this and getting a chance to be involved in something like this feels bigger than them. It feels bigger than the company, right? It's not just AT&T getting better, it's the world getting better. And so you're absolutely right. I do think the pandemic's a great time that leveled the playing field from everyone getting to contribute, and it could provide purpose in a way that maybe some of our folks are feeling a little burdened, right, with everything going on in the world and not sure how to do something bigger than what they do all day, every day. Julie, did you want to weigh in as well?
Yeah, I mean, it was a great question, Caren, and I was really happy just listening to everybody and really hearing the sort of like this unanimous, yes, now's the time. I think, if I reflect on the last, 18 months, and as you said, Caren, it's the pandemic, but it's the broader, unrest and challenges in the world that I think, have just been so apparent, right? And so, maybe one thing to think about is the bigger the problems in the world, the more we need everybody weighing in, the more we need diversity of thought. So, just underline and support everybody's commitment that this is the time.
So let's go back to the data. Let's go back to some of the gaps that you identified, right? Isabella, I thought it was so interesting to hear you talk about some of the gaps, right, that existed that you didn't realize, right? And some of those gaps existed within Microsoft, right? In that you were looking at this business unit versus this business unit. And some of the gaps, Laura, you mentioned, were in looking at the data. Julie, you mentioned that too, right? You were thinking about it, the female inventorship, and then you noticed these other gaps. And so it was like, which one do we focus on? So think about those gaps, right? And looking at either the qualitative information that you gathered through focus group or the gaps you saw in the data itself. What was the reaction from the folks who were working with you on this to those gaps? Talk a little bit about that, because as you've all said, it's hard to be transparent when you found problems because no one wants to say they're doing poorly. And certainly, I think, Laura, you said this, no one wants to say they're doing worse than someone else, but all of those things are true in this effort. And so how did people in the company react to those gaps? And how were they about being transparent, about talking about the gaps, including the data? Anybody want to start us off on this party? Go, Laura.
Yeah, well, this is you're touching on a very important topic, Caren. And we all have very proud inventor communities and research organizations, and pointing out the kinks is not always the happiest conversation. And I think in our case, it's required a top-to-top discussion and emphasizing that our teams are not showing up to point out problems. We're showing up to get sponsorship for improvement. And as we reframe the discussion in a very positive way and a world-changing way, we've gotten a lot of traction. So I think it's key to think about the messaging here, because we are discovering very interesting, provocative, and sometimes concerning things. So taking all of that and packaging it up in a way of, let's not spend time on how we got here. Let's talk about how we address these things. So that would be my little kernel of advice.
Yeah, I think I would have a very, very similar answer. I think that when something is working really well, there's a tendency to sort of just say that's working and why should we change it? And so that's kind of what I meant at the beginning when I said I would have been bolder, because you could point to a lot of things that are working really well, but especially as we started getting into the qualitative and what's underneath these numbers, and we saw, wow, we could actually really change, the trajectory that we're on, people got very energized. So you kind of had to go past, you really had to get past that, is there something broken, to the insight and kind of the aha of what a difference we could make.
Yeah, our experience was very similar, Julie, to what you just said. I think our initial reaction as we dug into the data was a little bit of surprise at first. I think we felt as a company, we've been committed to diversity for a long time. We have lots of programs, lots of trainings, leaders have, they're accountable for plans. Sheryl Sandberg wrote the book, Lean In. I mean, this is something that is really in our DNA, but then we look at the data and we find we're not nearly as good as we thought we are. So a bit of surprise there. And then I would say it shifted to a bit of intimidation of this is a big problem. And Isabella did a nice job, I think, of really kind of going into the complexity of the problem. And it's, different business units are different. I think across the pipeline, you've got different issues. And then even, within different affinity groups, underrepresented groups, there's different issues. And so the idea of trying to meet people where they are there's a tension between that and trying to create a centralized unitary program that's a one size fits all, that is certainly easier to administer and convenient. But if you go the other direction, it's going to be costly and it's going to take longer and it's going to be more complex and you're going to need more headcount. So trying to reconcile that tension is kind of made us feel like, wow, this is a really big, like, where do we go? And I think we sort of then shifted, Julie, to I think what you were saying, which is that it created some excitement. This is an opportunity. We actually can do something. This is a big problem. If everything were easy to do, it actually wouldn't be terribly fun. And Caren talked about purpose, and our company, and I didn't probably fully appreciate this until more recently, but it's a very mission-focused company. People come to our company because they believe in our purpose, our mission at a company level. And so we have a lot of zealots, people who want to do good. They came here to fix hard problems. And if we activate that, if we give them that purpose, they will rise to the occasion, they will come together. The hesitancy in terms of wanting to share, I think there was that natural hesitancy to say, we don't want to, look bad. We don't want to air our dirty laundry. But there were two things, I think, for us that sort of made it a little bit easier. One was, we have now, I think for about 10 years, published a diversity transparency report at the company level. So we talk about, different groups and our level of diversity, across the company, across leadership, gender, race, and now we're adding other areas. So we have had a history and a commitment towards transparency, generally speaking. So that helps certainly. But I think part of it was that we had, this was a couple years ago when Suzanne talked about the gathering, and we participate in that, and we did some sharing with a small group of companies in terms of what we had discovered, and even that felt a little uncomfortable. I think just even with a group of companies that we meet with all the time, here's some things we've learned, here's some things that aren't going well. It was very therapeutic, because what we've learned was that the reaction we got was everyone. Once you broke the cone of silence, you discover that everyone else is going through the same problem. Everyone is experiencing the same issues. And what it does is that you're not alone. And so once you're not alone, you feel comfort. You feel comfort in knowing that there's others going through the same thing, and it's not unique. And now we actually have a chance to collaborate and work together. And so for us, it kind of made it a little easier to go bigger, to a larger community, to other folks, other companies willing to sign the pledge and do this at the industry level. So for us, it was a step-by-step process, I would say, but I think we're getting there, and I hope that others will will also get past any hesitancies that they may have.
Isabella?
Yeah, I'll just say that I think we as lawyers sometimes think, or because we're always trying to make the client groups happy, that these messages aren't going to be taken well. But what we actually found is that, maybe we as the patent team were a little more ashamed of, the gaps than the product groups were. So I just want to encourage everybody not to assume that your client groups are not going to welcome this. Actually, we were really, I think, energized by how much energy they put into this, because they're working on this for themselves and all the other, with respect to all the other diversity goals, as Alan and all of our companies have, right, and have been working on this for a very long time. And so I think, what I would say is, don't assume that it's going to be a problem. Actually, I think it's probably going to be less of a problem than you think, but it might be, just in all honesty, like a little embarrassing for us as the lawyers who are responsible for this. The other thing is, I do think what Alan said about sort of the tension between, I think, a lot of, sort of corporate departments, whether it be HR or finance or the legal department, and particularly, I think, I'll just say this, with respect to patent folks, like, I think patent people love process and they love their operations and all that kind of stuff. But you really have to think about doing things a little bit differently for different business units. That's just the reality of a large corporation. And so I would just say, be prepared for that and be open-minded about that. And if you're open-minded about those things that we have to do and really listening to the client groups, then I think, you'll be able to see some, difference.
Well said. Scott, do you want to add anything before I ask you the last and final question?
I think this group's covered it well. I would just simply say, none of us is perfect. Individuals, corporations, the only way you get better is to see where you are. And, there's lots of people here to help, and it's not a, it's not nothing wrong with you. It's simply that you are who you are, and let's try to do the best we can and improve ourselves every day.
Well said. So, that question was about gaps, and it was about how did people react. But we also know, right, from social science, that talking about progress and wins is remarkably motivating. And so if we just talked about the gaps, right, it might take everybody down, and we might feel like it's so complex and so overwhelming, it's hard to make progress. So the very last question I want to ask you are about some of your wins and about your progress. And I don't expect that you are, amazingly diverse in the patent or in the inventors space just a couple of years down the road. But I'm positive that you've had some small wins, and we should talk about those. So I want to ask you to just talk about one small win. And I also want you to say, in that same vein, what do you think success looks like a year from now or 5 years from now in this endeavor for you? Because we are talking about making progress, but we know progress is slow. And so it'd be great to know kind of what your company has identified and said, this is what success will look like. Because hopefully when you signed on, you looked backwards and said that, and now you're working towards it. So let me ask anybody who wants to start, one small win that you've experienced thus far, and what does success look like? And that's how we're going to close out the session.
I'm happy to go.
Thanks, Julie.
Sure. So, I think success is that, our inventor community reflects the diversity of our consumers. And I think that, kind of the progress I hope to see is that our inventor community, that our entire innovation community feels engaged in the inventorship process and understands why and how they can engage. And so that brings me to my small win, which is, one of the things I wanted to do when I first started thinking about how we could go after this was engage the entire innovation organization in the importance of IP as part of our business model. Because what I saw is that there was this sort of idea that that's somebody else's job, that there's specialists over there and they do it all, versus like it's everybody's job. And so I created with my team a little bit of a module, and I want to kind of address Mike's question in the chat. This was much more about why it was important and the power of patents and why you should invest your time there than it was on the how. And that was quite different than what we've done in patent training before, which was much more on the how. The response to that was incredible. So huge, like surprise to me how incredible the response was to that. And I started then getting pulled for that, not just in the formal trainings that we do, but teams that wanted to engage in the topic, right, as multifunctional teams. So it was really exciting to see, and again, really energized me about how we can make pretty fast progress in a meaningful way.
Well, and there's an entire body of research. For any of you who have seen or read the book, right, Simon Sinek's book, and seen his TED Talk, he talks about the power of why. And this goes back to Isabella's comment about, as patent lawyers, sometimes we're so focused on process and we're so focused on the how that we skip the why. And so, Julie, I think that's a phenomenal small win to have focused on the why, and then that draws the purpose piece into the mix as well. For those of you who haven't seen Simon's TED Talk, it's phenomenal. So I'll put it in the chat function in just a second. Who else wants to tell a little bit about a small win and what your success measurement is towards, the end of this? And for Julie, I think you said having your inventor community look a lot like your consumer community. So I think that's a great success measurement. Who wants to go next?
Caren, I'll go back in history and probably reveal my age, sadly. In the 1990s, when I was at Kodak, we had a very well-known and highly regarded researcher come in to speak to the labs. And she started by sharing that she had looked at the percentage of female inventorship at Kodak. And similar to a statistic, I think maybe Alan referenced earlier, it was something around 7%. And there were gasps in the crowd when people heard this. And so we spent a couple of years really trying to do a deep dive on how this could be when we had pretty diverse lab teams. We just couldn't understand where the disconnect was. And we found this really, looking at the data, again, even back then, we found that there was this tradition that had developed in the labs that the senior researcher got to select the named inventors on any disclosures. And of course, they were deselecting the minority members of the team. So we then launched into a lot of training and tough conversations around inclusion and collaboration. And over that period of time, we're really able to significantly multiply the number of underrepresented and female inventors that we had on our patent, on our invention disclosures. So that was a win. And times have certainly changed, but I don't see any reason why that's still not, that example is not one we should be looking for today. Again, back to the data, right? And finding the gaps, what we've been saying all morning.
Isabella?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Alan.
Go ahead, Alan. So I was just going to say, I love Julie's aspiration. I mean, and I'm not sure that's something that is something for us to aspire to, which is to have our developer community reflect our user community. We also know that our developer population within our company doesn't necessarily reflect our user community. So we are constrained in terms of the internal population we could draw from. So for me, at least, maybe more medium term. So what Julie said would be our long term aspiration. I think more in the medium to long term would be to have representation across our current developer community or our future developer community, and making sure we're drawing from all parts of it. And as far as small win, I talked at the outset about just some different experiments we ran, and we were able to bump our invention disclosure and from women from 7% to more than tripling it. That was a small win, but we want to be able to see that across the entire pipeline of the process, from the engagement, awareness, submission to filings, prosecution, issuance, and abandonment. And I think the other piece and this goes again maybe more to the how. So the why is we want to have that community that reflects our users, because we want to have products that reflect what users care about. But on the how, we want a system that is adaptable, that is able to meet the needs of our community. And so if we have incentives, for example, that are just really only attracts certain people, So, you know, if we're giving swag and only men like the swag and the women don't, we have built in a process that is going to exclude certain people. If we're giving money away and money is not what attracts people, but it's time, then we don't have a system that actually is going to incentivize the right behavior. So having a system that probably is more multifaceted than what it currently is to be able to reflect the needs across our community is what it's going to look like as well.
That was well said. And it's funny because I was just reading something yesterday about a company offering an Xbox. And all I could think was, I don't need one more of those. I already have a 13-year-old. Yeah,
you could sell it for
right?
quite a bit of money. It's hard to get one these days.
That is true, Isabella, you are correct. Anyone else want to weigh in on small wins and what success measure looks like for your company?
Yeah, I just want to add one thing about the why and build on what Laura said about the inventorship. I mean, there's one reason that you should make sure your inventorship is right is because your patent's invalid if it's not right. And I can't tell you the number of times that, you know, as a litigator, we have challenged the inventorship and whether or not people were included in this, it shouldn't be. So if nothing else, if you want your patents to be valid, you got to have the right inventorship on them. So just everyone should be aware of that. But I think that maybe one small win we've gotten from, you know, really pushing this issue is we've gotten a lot more time from executives because I think normally a lot of us, we don't get a lot of like senior VP, you know, EVP time as the patent lawyers. But we've gotten a lot more engagement since we started talking about this. So that's great for us both with respect to our diversity initiatives, as well as just our general innovation and getting time to talk about, you know, our strategy and that sort of thing. You know, in terms of success, we have the same challenges I think that Alan mentioned. We need more diversity in our engineering teams in general in the company, and then we need our innovations to match that. And so, you know, maybe this is modest, but I think what we're hoping to see in the next, you know, 3 to 5 years is just some real measurable improvement in both of those areas. And that's not necessarily going to say that we'll stop there, but I think I think for us, we are a little concerned that, you know, if you set the bar too high and you don't meet it, then, you know, we should be ambitious, but we should also not, you know, let like the perfect be the enemy of the good. And I think in general, if we are better engaged with our inventor community and our innovation community and making them happy and making them feel like they can do the best work they can, then I think in reality, that's probably, you know, for us as the patent team, the thing that I think we will feel, you know, is a success.
Agreed. And those small wins will beget other wins, right? So even if we're thinking about the process, right? And Alan, you went through the different phases, but we can also think about it, disaggregating it by our historically underrepresented patent inventors, right? So Julie, you mentioned making progress with women, right? Talk about that. That's a small win. And we know you still want to make progress with inventors with disabilities and LGBTQ+ and racial and ethnic diversity, but also think about it in terms of the disaggregation of these different groups, because I can't remember who said this, but everybody has different needs and there's different reasons for which that you may not be making as much progress in certain groups as others. So Isabella, I think that point was so well taken. All right, Scott, do you want to wow us with your small win and your success measures?
I will quickly close us out here. So, you know, I think what the group said was well said. You know, I do think we want our inventor community to represent our customer base. And at the same time, I think one of the big successes is going to be not just to have more diversity, but to have, you make sure it's truly diverse. You know, not just more women, not just more people of color. I mean, it's going to be interesting to try to really, truly represent your customers. So that to me is the ultimate success. The wins that I'm talking about, the small wins that I think are actually big wins, are the stories, the people who would in the past not invent, who have now come forward and are part of the process. And I'm hearing those stories, and it's again, it warms my heart, but I also know it's really important and it's really impacting our company. So yeah, I'm excited about what we're doing here. I'm excited to be part of this, and just appreciate everybody's participation.
Well, I want to say oh, Laura, did you want to end with
Just
some
wanted,
words of wisdom?
just keying off of Scott's comment, as I scrolled through the participants here, my impression is we have a very diverse crowd. And as you said, Caren, diversity begets diversity. So it tells me that this initiative already has gained momentum, and we've got the powerful force of a diverse group driving it. So thank you, everyone.
Well, and I'll just second that quickly as we close. So thank you to the 5 of you, because without your company and your leadership, Suzanne will tell you this could have never gotten off the ground. And that same heartfelt thanks goes to those other 25 companies and leaders from those companies that are early adopters. And the hope, right, is that we have this same conversation, but with a larger and larger set of companies every year. And we continue to talk about the small wins. We continue to talk about the gaps. And I just want to thank you all for getting that party started today, and to our hosts, Suzanne and Val and Lee and others. So Val, I'll turn it back over to you.
All right, thanks a lot, Caren. Thanks for leading the panel. I think you did a great job. I think, of course, in what you said at the end was, I can only echo that it's great to show this leadership. We need to have leadership, but leadership also has to have the transparency and willingness to share, which helps other people to want to join. So it gets us over the hump and hopefully allows us to get to the goals that Suzanne set up this morning. So the next session is on advocating for change, and it'll start at 9:40 Pacific time on a new Zoom link. For the rest of the time we have to the end of this session, at the next 10 minutes, we're going to show you a video by Lemelson MIT, has been working with invention and diversity. So we hope you'll stick around and watch this from our colleagues at Lemelson MIT. See you in 10 minutes at the next session. Thanks a lot.
My name is Kayla Nguyen. I am from Cornell University. I'm in the applied physics department. I'm a PhD student, and I won the Lemelson MIT Student Prize for the USIPA competition. I felt that it was really empowering for me to win as a woman, because there were a lot of young girls who came up to me and they were looking up to me, and they were so happy that I actually talked to them, or I gave them advice. For the girls, in order for them to overcome this kind of confidence barrier, they need other women actually speaking out and playing a role for them to tell them, hey, you can do it, don't be afraid. I think that it's really important for other women to meet other women who are interested in also inventions, and just to build a support group, because inventions don't actually happen in a vacuum, it actually happens in teams. So you can meet other people who also enjoy inventing things, and that will actually build up your confidence in your knowledge, and together you can actually solve the problem.
My name is Claire Mabor. I teach biology and global perspectives at Northeast High School in Oakland Park, Florida. So I grew up in Haiti, and I was in Haiti until I was 6 years old, and then I moved to the US. I'd say that I'm very blessed to have had the experience that I had in Haiti, because as a student, I knew that the privileges I had in America, people back home didn't have those same privileges. So I really took education very seriously, and I wanted to make sure that whenever I transitioned through anything in life, that I kept in mind that there's more out there than just my view or my worldview. But I was an inventing student from 2011 to 2012, and that experience really changed the course of my career in my life, when thinking about how to solve real issues in the world and how to use my background or my interests to make an impact on that. And then from then, I also gained some skills in engineering that I didn't have before. I don't think I used the tool appropriately, at least until 2012. And my mentor, Ms. Flynn, really had a huge impact on that. Without her having invited me into that program, I wouldn't have had that opportunity. And I don't think I would be here today or even be teaching, or I don't know if I would have stayed in the sciences as strongly as I did without that experience. And that experience also taught me that no matter what someone's interest is or what their talents are, they can have an impact on the world.
My name is Antonio Gamboa. I teach at Gary High School, and I teach currently AP Biology, AP Chemistry, AP Environmental, but I've taught for several years chemistry, biology, and pretty much every science that there is. Invent Team is one of the best opportunities for students to discover themselves and to give themselves an opportunity to see how they could fit in society and how they could use science, mathematics, research, engineering, and to create. And so it's not secluded only to those that are interested in science. It's inclusive because you need the person who is the finance, you need the person who is the spoken person, the one that reaches out to the community. One of the unique things that our team has is that they come from different countries. One is from Nepal, another one is from Guatemala, another one is from Cambodia. They all both face similar challenges. Two of them are from Mexico, and so they all have different challenges. 6 girls, 1 boy. 2 of them are 10th graders, and the rest are 11th graders. They all have dreams, and they all know that hard work will take them somewhere. But it's a team of future engineers, probably.